Fine. This is the October 20th regularly scheduled council work study session. I'd like to call that work study session to order, and would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay. We have several special guests tonight, and our first one is Mr. Jesse Palmer from the YMCA. And Jesse, before I turn the mic over to you, I would like to go around the table and have each member of the council introduce themselves. And we'll start with you, Mr. Chang. Okay.
John Clausen.
Jerry Childs.
Beth Ashby.
Jeff Cartwright.
Cindy Lucarelli.
Okay. Staff, do you want to?
Oh, Carol Morris.
Mark Dorsey. Alan Martin.
And I'm Tim Mathis. So, welcome, Jesse. And Jesse is here to answer, give us first a short update about the YMCA issue, and also answer any questions we might have. So, Jesse, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me here tonight. Giving you an update on we're calling it the South Kitsap Port Orchard Community Center Survey Study. And we had an initial meeting back in September. We brought together the city, the county, Harrison Medical Center, South Kitsap School District, plus a number of local concerned citizens who had asked for us to lead this process, and started talking about what the community needs were here in Port Orchard. And it was unanimous that everyone wants to see some type of community center, whether or not it's a YMCA or a center where the Y comes in, provides services, and Boys and Girls Club comes in, other providers coming in. We don't know that yet. So the next step was to do this market research to find out what type of center South Kitsap needs. So since that initial meeting, the county has committed $10,000 for the study. South Kitsap School District has committed $3,000. CHI Franciscan Health is committing $5,000. It's a $25,000 study, and we look to the city to fund a portion of that. We'll contribute as well because we're very interested in what the needs are here in Port Orchard. So again, that purpose of the study is to identify what the community needs are, whether it's health, recreation, sports, fitness, social, mental services. We don't know that yet, but that study will help us define that. It'll find out where people are willing to drive to, so we get an idea of drive time. Do we put it on the east side of town, towards 16, on the west side of 16? And it gives us, from a Y standpoint, a high level of detail and accuracy that, community surveys don't necessarily get to. And we're able to take that information and find out, okay, if we were to put a center here in town, what type of services could we provide? Who else could we partner with to do activities? Do we build a standalone facility? Do we partner with another agency to build a facility? Types of membership, pricing, et cetera. And the agency that we're working with is Daxco T2. We've done a lot of work with them over the years. Our Hazelwood Y in Silverdale is a project they did market research for. And just using that as an example, they did the initial research that said between 12,000 and 15,000 people were interested in a YMCA in Silverdale. We built a facility based on that demand and exceeded it. So we've got about 20,000 people. It's one of our most successful facilities, and it's because of that market research. We knew exactly what amenities to add to that building. We knew the types of services people were interested in. We knew the drive times. We knew where to market. So, and we've had that success in Gig Harbor, Tacoma, Sumner, other areas. So anyhow, that's where we are with the study. So next steps for us is we'd like to commission that study in the early part of November. So there is still time for the city if they're interested to contribute toward that.
Next month?
Yeah. So we've got it. Yeah, and the reason being is, we know the county, the school district, their budget years, they've allocated that funding for this year. We want to get the market research in before the end of the year, before we start losing people for the holidays. And this firm, they do this across the country, and so they've got the resources and expertise to pull something off like this in a month. So we'd have results back before Christmas time to present to the city, county, and all the other stakeholders. So again, trying to get that market research started by the first part of November, results by, I'd say before Christmas. And from there, we can assess, whether, the Y moves forward, whether the county takes this on, the city takes it on. So.
A couple of questions then.
Sure.
Not only, the first question is how much you're thinking Port Orchard should kick in. The next one is the school district is involved because of the new potential campus that they might have?
So yes, right. I'd leave it to the city council to determine the amount that you guys feel is, worth it for this type of data and whether or not, the community center is worth it to you. And the school district's interest is partly the new campus, and they're bringing in Olympic College to offer programs. They're bringing in the library, and so they've approached us about providing services. Whether or not we locate there, we don't know. Again, that's what the market research is going to tell us.
And so, if they offer you $1,000, you'd be happy with that? Or no?
We would take it, and
But you would like how much?
there's so we got 18. So I mean, splitting the difference
You have
between
18 right now?
that's been committed between the county, school district, and CHI. And, the Y is going to contribute. So if we split it and said 3,000 or 4,000 from the city, and the Y would pick up the rest, that would be.
I'm comfortable with 3 because that's what the school district is using.
Sure.
It seemed we'd be around the same ballpark. I don't know how the rest of council thinks.
What'd you say?
3,000? That's what SKSD is doing?
There are some legal issues related to this, and I'd be happy to provide you with a memo before the next council meeting if you'd like to consider that before you make a decision.
So I had heard that from the previous meeting. So you could pay the consultant directly and avoid paying the Y if there was concerns about paying the nonprofit for the study.
Does that resolve that for you, Carol?
No, not really, but like I said, I can have the memo for you at the next council meeting. You're not making a decision tonight to contribute, are you?
Well, I don't know, it's coming pretty fast. Everybody else?
You mean the next council meeting, like next week?
Yes,
The 27th?
right.
Could you explain what the next step would be, assuming that maybe you could walk through the process that Silverdale went through once they completed that survey? Yeah.
So if we determine that there is a need for a community center and that the community wants the Y to lead that or be involved in that, for us, again, it would depend on if we built a standalone facility, we'd head down a different path than if we co-located and did something at the school or in the community in an existing facility. But we would come back, do a kind of our own internal planning and a business model to find out, okay, if we knew there was demand, what types of services, what kind of membership would we offer here? So we do some our own internal. If it was a standalone facility, we'd look at a fundraising feasibility to find out whether or not there was the potential to fundraise. But again, it would be driven by that market study that would say, you've got 10,000 members, it could support a 40 to 50,000 square foot facility. How much do we have to fundraise in order to build something like that? We'd want to test the capacity, and we'd do that on our own dime to make sure that we could, support a facility here. But take the Hazelwood example. We started that project, I think the market research was done in 2007. We started fundraising in 2009, construction in 2010, and it was open on June 1st, 2011. So, we're probably 4 or 5 plus years out before, there's something physical, if it's a standalone. I mean, we're already offering services here in Port Orchard. We've got 2 before and after school sites at the elementary schools that we do before and after school programs with. So, I mean, we could come in and expand that, tomorrow, but facility and services would take some time.
Have you citizens to contribute to this feasibility study, or are you just asking the government agencies to do that?
No individuals at this point, just the kind of the larger stakeholders at this point. And there's a point where we bring the community in, and that's usually during like a capital campaign. We bring the community in and say, you know, we need your support to help raise whatever the amount is. And
And could you please restate, because I'm not sure I heard you correctly, when the report is done, who evaluates that report? Who sees that report? You had said the Y will take it internally and do some things with it. Is that where it lives, or is it
No.
does it live with the people who funded it?
right, so it's really the stakeholders. So if the city was a stakeholder, it'd get a copy of the report. You know, we'd come and present it to the council. In fact, the whole city would get it. So I think it'd become a public document. So I mean, and the city could take it and find out, you know, if there was interest in doing its own thing. You know, you'd have information to do that.
I'm comfortable with what I heard.
You guys are pretty quiet tonight. I actually like the idea. I didn't like it when we first started talking about it, because I felt like we were like an island unto ourselves. But I see the partnership growing, and I really like that. And then I know it'll be a big asset to the community. If we can afford it, it's a big asset to the community. So I kind of like that. I'd like to find out. I don't think, as Fred said, put it in 3,000. I think we could swing that.
I think we get a lot for a buck for $3,000. We get a lot for $3,000 for market research, because there's been a lot of efforts, I think, over the years to try to nail down just exactly how supportable a community center would be in this.
We don't know if we don't ask the questions.
Yeah.
I guess my take on it is just a little different in that what I heard was the county was contributing $10,000 and that the school district was contributing $3,000. And if Port Orchard looked at something between $3,000 and $5,000, we're basically asking the taxpayers of our community to fund this feasibility study. And that's the part where I'm just a little uncomfortable with, because we haven't gone to any of the benefactors. We haven't gone to, you know, some of the people that may be willing to write checks. And
Franciscan is.
the Franciscan is the only other one,
Yeah.
right. That's just something that I wanted to say out loud. The taxpayers in South Kitsap are already putting in $13,000, and now we're asking them to put in more. So this is definitely basically funded by our taxpayers.
See where you're going with that.
I certainly appreciate what you're saying, Beck, but I also look at it, you know, I don't know what we spent internally to survey our citizens on a variety of things. I think most recently was the parks. So you have to make an investment in
The research.
the research to understand what it is that our citizens want. And unfortunately, you can't always just sit here and have 2 or 3 of them come in and say what they want and expect that to represent the whole city. So I guess I'm not quite as concerned. I think it's an investment into our future. And certainly if we were to go to the next step, and if Port Orchard was going to invest in whatever, and that's why I was interested in what is the next step. I would certainly want something that tells me that, yes, the citizens are interested and they're interested in X, Y, and Z.
I guess for clarification, are these $2015 with an amendment or $2016?
15.
What I heard was 15 if they want to do it by November. Unless they want to front the city alone until 16.
Well, I just
we can
wanted to
pay
clarify.
alone.
Make sure we all heard
Not
that.
a March budget.
I
I
also,
also have to say that, you know, I'm interested in what the attorney has to say. Obviously, I don't care about you guys, but I don't want to go to jail.
Probably make it sleep.
Yeah. So, I'm comfortable with it, what the attorney has to say next Tuesday is, I think, within a time frame that's acceptable in my mind.
Right, and we need to talk to our treasurer too. Yes. Yes, we need to talk to you. Yes, yes, you're okay. You're okay. So, okay. So that would be, we'll have a definitive answer at the end of our meeting next Tuesday. Is that right? Works for me. All right. Any other questions?
Okay, great, thanks, President.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
So the direction is it's gonna be on next Tuesday's agenda with an action item with, you know, a memo from the attorney.
And this is a new person. Brianna Murray. Hooray. Okay.
Brandon, either you need to put gloves on, or I need to get sunglasses.
I'll pass that along to the one who paid for it.
So,
If you'd like me to,
okay.
I will.
I think it would be good.
Okay. Well, good evening. I'm Brianna Murray with Gordon Thomas Honeywell Governmental Affairs, your contract lobbyist. I'm here this evening to begin the discussion with all of you on your 2016 legislative agenda. You have a couple different documents in your packet. My intention is that today's discussion and the purpose of today's discussion is for you all to provide me feedback on what you would like included on your 2016 agenda. I anticipate that you may have an epiphany after this meeting of something that you might want added, and I would encourage you after the meeting to reach out to me if that happens. But that my goal would be by the end of November, I will be able to get back on your schedule to bring forward to you a final agenda for approval. So today is about getting your feedback. And I want to start with just providing some background on what to expect in the 2016 legislative session. And some of this is a repeat from my last visit. But essentially, the 2016 legislative session starts on January 11th. It is a short 60-day session. The legislature will focus on amendments to their adopted budgets. They adopted an operating, capital, and transportation budget, and they will be making amendments to those. So there's not a huge opportunity with a whole new set of funding. They're just making amendments. Additionally, they're going to be taking up education funding as a top priority issue and considering policy bills. Similar to the 2015 session, the Republicans will hold a narrow majority in the Senate, and the Democrats will hold a very narrow majority in the House, which may get even more narrow after the upcoming election. The documents you have before you are your current legislative agenda, which is a 2015 legislative agenda. We do develop our legislative agendas in sync with the biennium. So this agenda was intended to last you 2 years. I'm very happy to report that the vast majority of this agenda you happen to have accomplished in the first year, which is why I'm here now to ask you if there's anything more you'd like to accomplish in the second half of that year. You also have a memo that I've drafted that outlines in a bit more detail what to expect in 2016. And on the second page of that memo goes through what I describe as emerging issues, or bills and pieces of legislation that I know happen to be will be introduced this coming session from my network of relationships in Olympia. And then finally you have the AWC legislative agenda. There are a few questions that I posed in your executive summary that I'd like you to think about. I'll go through those questions, and then I thought I'd walk through the emerging issues and then hear from all of you on the answers to those questions and your response to the various emerging issues. So what I'd like you to think about is, while the 2016 session doesn't offer a whole new round of funding, it is an excellent opportunity to lay the groundwork for securing funding in 2017. So I'd like you all to think about, what is your next capital funding request? We've had some great success with DeKalb Pier. we've been able to fund both phases of it. And we have, in the transportation arena, had some great success in securing funding for Bay Street pedestrian path. So my question to you all is, what is the next big project we're going to tackle together? The next question is if there are any changes to state law that could save the city time and money. You have identified some of those issues with regards to public records changes and other items like that, but I'm always open to new ideas. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through some of the issues that I've identified as being emerging issues, and you guys can think about sort of those two questions as context. I broke up the emerging issues into a couple subcategories. The first is local control, and I know that there is legislation around fireworks that's likely to be introduced that allows cities to adopt regulations limiting or prohibiting fireworks without waiting a year. Current law requires you to wait a year before adopting any prohibition or restriction. In light of the many fires and dry weather, there's interest in eliminating that year-long wait. The next item on local control is allowing cities to adopt ordinances allowing and regulating marijuana lounges, whereas current law bans marijuana lounges. The thinking on this item is that people will consume marijuana on a sidewalk, and it would be better to put them inside in a marijuana lounge to do that activity. The third item is a bar license, allowing cities to veto bar license renewals if public safety concerns have arisen. Right now, if you have a tavern or bar in town where your police is frequently responding to calls or there are other issues around that bar or tavern, the Liquor and Cannabis Board will seek your commentary on whether to renew that bar or tavern's license. Frequently, the Liquor and Cannabis Board, after receiving your comments, does whatever it wants anyway. And so this proposal would give your comments more teeth. The next category is revenue.
Can I ask you a question before
Sure.
you move off that category? And I certainly understand what the intent is for marijuana lounges, but I'm struggling to try to determine what's the difference between that and smoking. And we have people walk down the sidewalk and smoke a cigarette. Should we put them into a contained area as well?
Right. So under the laws that passed last legislative session, you cannot consume marijuana legally on a sidewalk, whereas you can legally smoke a cigarette on a sidewalk. So part of it is that if somebody is smoking marijuana on the sidewalk, they're violating state law. So this would be particularly in more urban jurisdictions where you have apartment buildings with non-smoking policies. People who smoke a cigarette would typically go outside to do that activity. However, if an individual smokes marijuana, not only can they not smoke it in their apartment, they also cannot go out to the sidewalk and smoke it. So this would be an opportunity to provide them with a place to do that activity.
So that's the logic behind that.
That is the logic, yes.
Okay.
Does the lounge have to serve food?
Why are we spending money to rent?
Or do we no longer have that stipulation? Like bars used to have to serve a certain amount of food for the
That
residents.
is, so the way the way the current draft of the bill is written, it would be up to the city to adopt an ordinance regulating any marijuana lounges. So it would be up to the city to adopt an ordinance allowing marijuana lounges. It would be up to the city to issue the license. And it would be up to the city to issue any regulations like the one you just mentioned. It would be they move the decision making completely out of the hands of the Liquor and Cannabis Board and entirely with the city, which makes it unique and different from your bar or tavern license. Moving on to revenue authority and cost savings. The first item is councilmatic authority to impose an additional quarter of real estate excise tax to make investments in affordable housing. There are a number of cities that are asking for this additional councilmatic tax authority. Next item is electronic signatures to allow for the efficient and secure use of electronic and digital signatures. Some cities believe that current law adequately allows cities to use electronic signatures. Other cities feel that it is not clear enough. It seems to vary by city attorney. This would be an effort to clarify that. The next item would be public records. This is actually currently on your legislative agenda, but is an update on the most recent proposal. It would be to pursue legislation that creates an alternative dispute resolution process for certain public records requests, establishes a grant program to help jurisdictions increase technology and make more documents available online, and places reasonable limits on time and budget for small jurisdictions. I'll note that versions of this legislation have been brought forward many previous years. You all have been actively supporting those proposals, and they're very challenging and controversial to pass the legislature. The next item is on meeting recordings. It would allow for the recordings of minutes to count as the certified written minutes for the meeting, which would save the city's staff time needed to take the recording and turn it into written minutes. And then under planning and land use, we're expecting there to be some proposals around vesting. However, the details are not yet known. And then also around nuisance abatements. Cities that conduct frequent abatements of nuisances or have issues with bank foreclosed homes being abandoned, there would be some increased authority and required communication for both cost recovery of completing those abatements, as well as communication with banks that foreclose on homes and then seem to disappear. The next item is under Public Works and Transportation. The first is a response fee. Would allow jurisdictions to impose an incident response fee to the state when local emergency responders go to an incident on a state route. An example of this would be that there's a car accident out on State Route 16. You have a City of Port Orchard police officer that spends 3 hours out there helping assist in the incident, and as a result, the city would bill the state a fee for the city officers' participation. The next item is MOTCA funding. If the city's received any MOTCA funds, which I am not sure that you have, my guess would be no, that those funds are in jeopardy of being lost. So. For parks, there's an issue regarding recreational immunity, amending the recreational immunity statute so that cities retain immunity on trails. I thought this might be particularly relevant for your Bay Street pedestrian path. Even though the path is used for recreational uses, you all accepted transportation dollars to complete that path. If an individual were to be injured on that path, it is likely that you would incur some sort of liability for their injury as current law stands. This would be a change in state law that says your current recreational immunity, which says you're not immune, which says that you're immune for those types of incidents as long as it's a recreational facility that you are opening up to the public, would apply. So it would protect you from that liability. This is a very controversial issue, but it does stem from a recent case out of Mercer Island.
Are we currently protected then, so with the trail with McCormick Parks?
It seems that the court's analysis relies, and I would defer to your city attorney, but it seems that the court's analysis relies on whether or not you receive transportation funding as part of constructing that trail. Although that's not guaranteed. That just happens to be the logic that they applied in this Mercer Island case. So in Bay Street Pedestrian Path, I happen to know you secured transportation funding because I was involved with that. I don't know with the use of McCormick Trail whether you received more recreation-oriented funding to complete that trail or whether it was so that then if you carry over the court's analysis would mean that theoretically you're protected because it's a recreational facility, although that has not necessarily been tested in court. And again, I defer to city attorney on all of that.
There are other issues related
Yeah.
to it as well, such
Yeah.
as latent defects, if
Right.
you don't have signs posted, and you have to make sure that you don't actually charge a fee, which I don't think you do.
The RCOWWRP grant program is currently undergoing a reevaluation. I'm tracking that item anyway, but there's likely to be some changes to that grant program as a result. Again, I'm tracking those for you already. And then there are two items under police. One would be amending the Public Records Act to exempt certain body camera footage. Under current law, if you have a police officer that's using a body camera, all of the footage is eligible for disclosure under the Public Records Act. That would not be the case if the law were changed. They would say that they're in the process of drafting the solution, but they would say that certain footage is exempt from disclosure. And I think the issue is, how do you define that certain footage? The next item is juvenile street racing. This is an issue in a number of communities who are looking to increase penalties to a mandatory minimum for juveniles who engage in street racing.
Well, in fact, that's what we people from racing around.
Only juveniles. We can go ahead.
You can go ahead and do it. I think you maybe already have the increased penalties. So those are, this is not intended to be an all-inclusive list. As you all know from working with me, hundreds of bills are introduced each legislative session. This was just a handful that I happen to know have a direct impact on city government. Some of them may be more relevant to your community than others, but I wanted to bring them to your attention and get your feedback on whether any of these issues are items you would want to add to your legislative agenda, but I also think, somewhat more importantly, whether there are any unique issues or unique projects to your community that you'd want to add to the agenda.
So, I mean, the obvious elephant in the room is Tremont. We know that.
Yeah.
But I'm extremely grateful for the funding we got for the pedestrian pathway. But the timelines I've heard are a few years out. And I think I can accept that from West Bates Center to Annapolis, but we have two segments that aren't connected. So if our lobbying effort, I would advocate for a lobbying effort to move some of that money up for us so that we can have a connected pathway, you know.
Segment 3.
I can work with Mark at figuring out exactly how much money needs to be moved into what biennium, and then we can coordinate with DOT and our delegation to see what makes sense.
Yeah, right now, we out of the 3.5 million, the state, for some reason, DOT is managing this funding, so they requested an initial cash flow, and then they came back with a revised one. Somebody basically swoops the 2017 to 19 time slot, and so that pushed everybody out. So other than some redesign in 16, like 60,000, I split it into basically the 19 through 21.
And I'd be okay with that time frame myself anyway for West Bay to Annapolis, and even the boardwalk replacement from the Marina Park to the ferry dock, because we've got something that we can use. It's not ideal, but I'd like to see 2017 funding and construction of the two linking the two segments. We have
So
a bridge
that's
going
so that's segment 3.
Segment 3.
How much is segment 3?
You're talking like 500,000
Okay.
ish.
I happen to have communicated with DOT a lot on their tiered system of funding these bike ped projects. I think there's a similar tiered system for a number of other types of projects as well. They're certainly going to be revisiting how they allocated that funding. The tier system doesn't seem to be working as efficiently as they envisioned, so I think there's a definite opportunity there to change.
even a fallback position of, I know currently you can't use your own money and get repaid.
Right.
If
you could.
If we could,
Right.
I think that would be a less desirable, but more desirable than waiting until 2021.
You shouldn't have told me that first. You should tell me that like midway through April or something.
We'll get back to that.
No, I'm just kidding.
It's
Okay.
only 1 to 7, so
We
it's.
don't want that, yeah.
Okay, so that sounds like an excellent addition. I appreciate that feedback. I'll integrate it into the agenda.
I would like a bit of a discussion on the West Sound Alliance.
Yes.
I know that the West Sound Alliance. I just wanted a discussion on the West Sound Alliance. I know that you were very active in that, and I know that it was designed for transportation funding. And I know there's some continuing work in making sure that those funds are actually appropriated in certain bienniums and all of that. However, I have been engaged in conversations with other jurisdictions, and I have a concern that they're looking to expand the scope of the West Sound Alliance. And I just kind of wanted your feedback on that.
Sure. So what I'm happy to do is share what I've been working on the West Sound Alliance on your behalf. I'm a West Sound Alliance steering committee member and participate in that. As you'll remember, this last legislative session, the West Sound Alliance put together a project list. Tremont was on that project list as sort of the Port Orchard item that we really wanted to see funded. And we worked with our regional partners to go to Olympia and secure funding. When it became obvious that Tremont wasn't going to be funded, I then transitioned at least the Port Orchard focus over to the Bay Street pedestrian path, which wasn't on the West Sound Alliance list, but I think our ability to secure the Bay Street pedestrian funding was benefited greatly by our participation in the West Sound Alliance and the regional effort. Since the end of session, we have, as a steering committee, met, and the steering committee is going to be giving a recommendation to the larger stakeholder group, of which all of you are considered to be members of. And the steering committee is going to recommend the continuation of the West Sound Alliance with a scope of revising the current project list to not only just follow the funding that's already been allocated, but to also look at what other projects may need funding in the immediate years, and what we can do in working with the state to get even more funding. And so their scope is really just that, implementation of the revenue package and then revising that project list. With all of that being said, if there are local conversations going on about a revised or different scope, that may occur at either there's a steering committee meeting in about a week and a half, and then the stakeholder meeting mid-November. All of that would occur in those meetings. But as far as my knowledge goes and my participation, it has been focused on transportation and particularly on the project list that you've all seen before, and on revising that project list to reflect funding received and future funding needs.
Brianna, has there been any discussion at the steering committee level on funding the administrative support for the West Sound Alliance?
Yes, not in great detail, just that it needs to be discussed. That there needs to be some sort of either staff sharing arrangement or administrative cost sharing arrangement to ensure that the alliance continues. You all have been contributing my time.
Correct.
So that has been your contribution to the West Sound Alliance effort. Similarly, my other client in the region, City of Gig Harbor, has contributed my time. Dylan Doty, lobbyist for Kitsap Transit, has been contributing his time. Tom McBride with Kitsap County, his time. And so your all participation in that has been that you included the West Sound Alliance on your legislative agenda and have been an active participant.
So back one ancillary or indirect project that's moving forward that affects the West Sound Alliance in Port Orchard is the SR16 Pierce County initiated study that was originally going to stop at the county line, but now goes all the way to Gore. So basically, we had a project that was the 160-16 overpass and, you know, basically the east-west connectors and then the Tremont overpass. So we met with the DOT the other day to make sure that as they're studying the SR16 corridor, they look at those basically Sedgwick and Tremont as a part of their study, which ultimately indirectly impacts the West Sound Alliance project list.
Correct, and I just kind of want to state my position to my other council members is that I support the West Sound Alliance and I support the work they've done in the transportation element. And I realize that there is some ongoing work we need to do after the major job was accomplished with getting money out of the transportation, getting the transportation package. What my position is I do not believe that the West Sound Alliance needs to grow and become more than it is. I believe the scope should be transportation
and not take on a lot of other, I don't believe it needs to grow legs and become something other than a collaborative transportation effort.
If I can remind everybody too of the genesis of the West Sound Alliance, it's because we learned that other regions had developed transportation advocacy groups, which was making them more successful at securing state funding. So I will take ownership that it was in large part my recommendation to you all, as well as other people in this region, that if people in the West Sound area did not start operating as in regional in nature, these other regions who were going to secure more funding. And we saw that with Snohomish County. They had the Snohomish County Committee on Improved Transportation. The Pierce County has an organization called RAMP, Regional Something Mobility Partnership. And over in Eastern Washington, the Tri-Cities have something called Tri-DEC. So there's each region has this type of a transportation-oriented group, and I take ownership over that recommendation, and I think you were successful as a result of those efforts.
Brianna, can you clarify for me in the legislative agenda, emerging issues, emergency responders, fire, police, and public works, correct? I mean, oftentimes we get called to clean up spills, glass. I just want to make sure that
On the
public
response
works.
fee? Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct. It would be more than just your police officers. That was just my visual example.
If I may, I was just going to remind the council that Mark and I met with Senator Angel in August to talk about the 160 corridor, and we sent her a memorandum outlining our desire to update the corridor study. And so, I think that's related to the West Sound Alliance work, but it's such a small project at $150,000, that may be something worth considering as well.
Good, I'm glad it's not all about the Belfair bypass.
Are there any thoughts on any of the other emerging issues, whether they are particularly of interest or the AWC items that somewhat mimic the emerging issues? Or other ideas that you have, changes in state law that you think would be beneficial to the city? I've shared with a number of my other clients as well that I do feel the 2016 session is a short session. It is immediately prior to a rather pivotal election cycle. If there was ever a year to have a more minimal legislative agenda, I think this would probably be the year, especially coming off of such great success in 2015 with both the DeKalb Pier being fully funded and the Bay Street pedestrian path being fully funded.
My guess is that they're going to be fairly well consumed with this whole Grace Harbor education issue.
Yes, education funding will be, but
Or McLaren, not Grace Harbor.
I would, I'll take bets that I think they won't resolve the issue in 2016 session.
I wouldn't take that back. Either. It's a moving target.
Yeah. So that was, yeah.
So working on maybe changing timelines for funding at the trail might be the very best chance.
Yeah, and a lot of these items where bills are going to be introduced certainly have an opportunity. And again, if you know what your next big capital funding project is going to be, having a year of head start time makes a big difference to me in being able to be successful for you. So if you know that it's Tremont.
No,
Yeah, and as we've discussed before, the challenge with Tremont is that it's just not competitive
Well, I think
for
there's
state
potential
funding.
for an additional request personally, and I think, we've talked about Bethel, and we need to redesign or revisit the design of Bethel. And,
I think we need to do that with local dollars, and that's what we're.
well, as long as we don't use federal dollars, if we use state dollars, the clock doesn't start ticking. So if we could get some state assistance in that design effort, that would be perfectly acceptable. You just don't want to mix federal dollars in there.
We know that Senator Angel is passionate about the Bethel corridor, so.
I think it's an important thing for us to do, at least the, I don't think we need design-ready plans or construction-ready plans, but the concept of what we're going to do and what
I
that's
think
going
we
to
need
look
to
like.
revisit that, and I think it's going to take some money to do that and do it correctly. You can't just, gloss over it. So getting some state assistance with that planning effort would be helpful.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're talking millions of dollars. I think that's something that's probably within the realm of possibilities. The other thing that I would suggest, and this is more focused for this year, is just protecting what we have and watching carefully to make sure that in the reprioritization of funding, we don't get pushed off to 2050 as opposed to 2020.
I also think that they need to focus on Cedric or 160.
Okay.
I think that has better chances in some ways because it's part of the state highway.
I didn't hear you, Fred.
160,
Yeah.
from 16 to Bethel, especially from 16 to Bethel.
For projects that are actual state routes, that makes it that is the challenge we've had with Tremont, is the lack of nexus to the state system.
I
So
would be happy to give it to them.
We can call it 166.
167.
they gave a lot of money to 167, didn't they? Other thoughts, other agenda items? So my plan is to take your feedback today and bring back to you a legislative agenda document for you to make tweaks to and adopt.
Well, I think your advice of not getting too rambunctious upcoming session is probably wise.
Plant seeds for 20.
Yeah, plant a few seeds and just stand back and protect. That'd be my suggestion.
And just to make sure whereas you guys conduct sort of one capital budget that includes your transportation projects, just a reminder that the state has a transportation budget and then a separate capital budget. And that separate capital budget is all of their bricks and mortar construction. So you can move forward with a Bethel corridor planning request or State Route 160 request and simultaneously move forward with a park funding or another dock or pier or.
Let's wait and see what we do with the survey of the community for community center.
City Hall
Could we expand City Hall or not?
City Hall
City Hall projects are successful when they are paired with another service provider. So City Hall standing alone projects kind of struggle to secure funding, but if you take City Hall and combine it with a community center, a library, and something else, or recently there's been a lot of City Hall police fire in one facility, those tend to be more successful. So in a very general standpoint.
We've got the money to buy the whole Pocket Park piece of land connecting to our pathway, but what is the need? I mean, I've heard things thrown on like a kayak launch point, Pocket Park.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we needing for that?
Well, I think a large portion of that property is going to be the trail and some trail accessories, benches, and probably some landscaping, but
It's probably not a capital.
it would be a small capital, and it probably could be supported through another RCO grant.
Yeah, most of it's already funded in the $3.5 million.
Okay.
Yeah. I think with the reform to the RCO and waiting to see what that looks like, we also need to start thinking about what types of projects we may want to apply for through that grant program. In 2017 will be the next window for that, and then
What
supporting.
about our wayfinding effort? Is there any opportunity
Signs?
for that? Or-
Signs?
No, it's wayfinding.
Well, all we have left is buying signs and installing them.
You don't want to call them signs because there's no funding for signs.
Is the struggle
Wayfinder.
is the struggle getting willingness out of DOT to allow you to have signs on State Route 16, or is it actual purchase, the actual purchase of the
Right.
signs? Unfortunately, I think the only nexus is if we're struggling to have DOT allow you to put the signs up, and we could
They'll
help.
have to go on Day Street or something.
No, so
Getting free one.
yeah, I mean, it's, so for example, if you wanted to put a giant sign on State Route 16 that said Port Orchard waterfront this away, usually DOT will say no, you can't put that on the side of our facility, and then we would seek a legislative solution to that obstacle.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point, because Alan and I did meet with WashDOT about putting a rider on the Tremont Street exit to say downtown Port Orchard or historic Port Orchard, and we haven't. They said that it's possible to do, but they haven't gotten anywhere with that.
Right, we did go down and meet with them, but that, I'd like to work with you on that, because
Okay.
a lot of people, you know, our entrance to the city says Tremont and Clifton, where,
And there is a Port Orchard next two exits as you're coming into town, but it doesn't.
Do you have a historical district in town?
if the sign's free, we will.
Okay, I think this is an item we can probably work on. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be on your legislative agenda for us to advance it,
But we
so,
would like to help. because
Alan, why don't we
got
connect?
slowed down.
Okay.
so.
Well, how long ago was the meeting?
Year and a half.
Okay, yeah, let's work on that.
They got stopped, basically. It slowed down as the
Slow down is
You know, just an aside, when I first got up here, just before Al Townsend left, we went out with his police cruiser and took all the photos of all the signs, all the way down towards Gig Harbor, all the way up, and documented those, and then went all the way back, all three directions, and picked up all the signs that brought me into Port Orchard with the idea, and we went down to DOT and said, hey, none of these really say Port Orchard ahead, and we have noodled on maybe getting some signage from the state down here, so we've got a plan.
Okay, so we will work on that item. And I don't think it needs to be a legislative agenda item. I think this conversation is plenty to direct me to do that project.
If you guys are willing to do that.
As long as everyone agrees.
Sounds like a good project.
Okay. Well, as I said, I expect you all to go home tonight and have an epiphany of all the items that you wanted to add to the legislative agenda. And I encourage you to either call me or email me. Do note that my email address is changed to reflect the new last name, so it's B. Murray now rather than B. Taylor. You all will be getting an email from me that shows my revisions to your legislative agenda. So you could just reply to that. Let me know if you have other ideas, and I will work to get on your council agenda at some point in November. Also, I'm going to begin scheduling meetings with our legislative delegation for you all to discuss the legislative agenda, and it'll be a series of 3 meetings, one with each member of your delegation, end of December, early January.
That'll be in Olympia, more than likely.
My hope would be here. If it's end of
Hopefully
December or
here.
early
Okay.
January, they wouldn't have gone to Olympia yet.
Okay, so
If we're not,
hopefully here.
hopefully here. If their schedules do not allow for that, a group of you will come to Olympia with me.
Okay.
Hopefully. I don't bite hard. That's true.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brianna, I have one last thing.
Yeah.
This will likely be the last time I'll see you, because I'll be going off the council. Jeff is going off as
Ditto.
well. And I just wanted to say that, I think back about when we hired your firm, and, it's a lot of money for a town that was going through a recession. What a great choice. And what a great service you do in our community. And I just appreciate having you.
Thank you. That's great to hear.
I would concur. I've been very, very impressed with your efforts.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. The city needs you.
Thank you. Well, it certainly is a team effort. You guys got to give me projects to go get money for. Thank you. I wish you both well.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll buy you a pair of clothes.
And you're more than welcome to stay. It's wrong.
I better get home to my new husband.
Thank you. See you later.
Yeah.
See you next month.
Yes,
It's coming fast.
I know.
Yeah. Okay, we're on item 3, lodging tax. Clerk Reinerson, will you lead us into this? Tell us about this one, please.
Oh, sure. Let's see. So the Lodging Tax Committee met on October 9th and has provided a recommendation to the council. And I have provided a summary of requests from 2010 to the current of what was requested and what was allocated over the last couple years. And also provided in your packet was the October 9th's committee minutes outlining the request and the committee's recommendation with a very short summary as to some of their thoughts for the allocation. And I believe that there are some committee members present that I'm not quite sure if they're planning on speaking tonight or if they were just going to let the council move forward. And of course, the chair is here as well.
We have a spot for the three of you to sit down.
So I guess I should also point out too that the lodging tax, there's 3 actions that you can take, and it's my understanding that you may choose only recipients from the list of the candidates and recommended amounts provided by the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. However, the city does not have to fund the full list as recommended by the committee, and it can choose to make awards in the recommendations amounts to all, some, or none of the candidates on this list, but keep in mind that the selected recipients must be awarded in the amounts recommended by the committee. So I think in the past you guys have gone down the list, and if there was a consensus on the recommendation for if there was a consensus on the recommendation from the committee to fund a applicant, it took the majority of the consensus, and then you moved on to the item, the next one, and then the ones that you guys had more concerns with, you left that to the end. So I don't know how you guys want to address the recommendations.
My only comment that I would make, and certainly don't have any heartburn with the recommendations, but I am a little concerned that the recommendation is to allocate 100% of the anticipated funds. That part makes me nervous, mainly from the standpoint that what happens if our projections are wrong? Who's going to get less? And how are we going to do that? And when do we do that?
There is, the budgeted amount is the total amount of revenue for 2016. There is there will be fund balance in the account, unassigned fund balance.
Start with the balance.
Right, and it's going to be somewhere north of $12,000 and greater.
Thank you.
I think I mentioned at the last committee meeting that our council meeting, the committee did not feel that there was a need to maintain the reserve. And as a matter of fact, the discussion of the holdover, or I don't know what you just call it, the
Unassigned fund balance.
unassigned fund balance, there was discussion about possibly dipping into that as well. So that's where I kind of said no. I said we are not going to any more than what's projected. But so that's one of the reasons that they felt that they didn't need the 10% reserve.
Okay, well, I mean, if they're starting with a reserve, they don't need to put more into a reserve. But I would need to tap into that reserve and allocate 100% of it.
And
so.
you probably remember that in the past, if the way that they allocate the funds is it's not necessarily, I want to say proportional, but if we only get like half of what's projected, then everyone would only get half of what they're allocated.
The only problem with that is that you sign an agreement with the mortgage and independent that you're going to buy so much ads. It's tough to go back to them and say, gee, I'm sorry, we only got 3/4 of what we expect, so I'm only going to pay you 3/4 of what I promised you. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but it is hard for these organizations to plan their activities with a cloud hanging over them that we may not get 100% of what we think we're going to get. So, I mean, it's okay if we're talking Chimes and Lights because that happens in December. But when you're talking Fathoms, it happens in June and July. It's a bit early. So do they get 100% of their funding, and then when we get to the end of the year, those who are at the end don't get much?
Actually, Randy could probably answer on how it's happened.
Well, I'm okay if we're starting with the reserve, because I think that will let us deal with those fluctuations, although our treasurer is normally 100% accurate in his return.
Of course, yes.
And I would anticipate that.
It's the normally part that I worry about.
Are we discussing that?
Yes. I raised the issue of concern of 100% of the allocation, but the treasurer pointed out that we're starting with a fund balance, and we'll have a cushion in case the projections are not 100% accurate.
That was one of my concerns.
It's like a lot of work, Fred, so thank you to you and the committee members. There's a lot of work to go through here. I can see all of the effort, so appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
So am I hearing consensus that the council is in agreement with the recommendation by the Lodging Tax Committee?
Well, I have some questions.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I'm looking for my minutes. They should be here somewhere. And I just had some, I just had, yeah, I do eventually want all of them, and I have mine here somewhere.
I'll rent them.
I just had some questions regarding some of the discussion that happened when you were making the different allocations. Under the Port Orchard Bay Street Association, it says that the committee reviewed the application and supported the request with the exception of the Ladies' Night Out event portion. So when you discussed the Port Orchard Bay Street Association, you said, okay, we're good with this, but we don't want to fund the Ladies' Night Out portion. Was that same discussion made on all of the events that the various nonprofits brought forward? Did you ask?
Out certain things, or?
Correct. Did you and was this relayed to the Port Orchard Bay Street Association so they know their Ladies' Night Out is not included in their marketing money or whatever it is this allocation is for?
I'm going to say the discussion was more centered on what we felt was really tourism from outside the 50-mile radius. And this was one that just sort of stood out as being primarily within 50 miles. So it was just singled out. I don't believe we have that level of detail with every event on all the applications. Committee members, do you remember anything similar?
Well, I think there's two things. Oh, excuse me. Let's get. If you don't have one of these, you're not recorded.
None of you recorded.
I think a couple of the discussions that we had was specifically that, like Ms. Cheng pointed out, that it wasn't a tourism. We did not feel at that point. So it was a discussion we had because they originally asked for 11.4. They ended up getting 4.2. So, relayed to the powers that be that, you're getting $6,000 less than you wanted. So something's got to give. And my guess is that at this point, the Ladies' Night Out is the part that will give as far as what money is spent on.
Well, I guess my question is, we will let them know that we're not going to fund anything that involves Ladies' Night Out.
Right. You know that, right? Yeah.
She was not in the room at that time, so.
No, exactly. And then,
I'll tell you now.
when I look at, again, the allocations that the committee came up with, and I'm looking for that page. And again, we're talking events. Can we assume when we go to Fathoms of Fun, they ask specifically for events for their float, concerts by the bay, and fireworks? So can we assume that any money they put in for reimbursement will be just those events, or are they allowed, if they do something else, to put in for other events?
I believe it was the events that they listed on the application, and we did, no?
Fred, I'm sorry, it's not, at least that's not the direction the committee was given. What the committee was told was that, yeah, what the committee was told was that you apply for the money, you're giving examples of what you're going to do, but the city doesn't allocate it in its budget that way. So if you say you have $11,000 for marketing and $6,000 for events, and you spend $11,000 for events and $6,000 for marketing, the city doesn't monitor that. And if there's a new event you're spending money for, or different marketing that you're using, it's not monitored at the city that way, is what we were told that first day when we were talking about how it worked.
That would be, I would defer to Brandy, since she administers the contracts.
So when an application is presented to the committee, they are providing their recommendation as to what they're going to be spending those dollars on. They provide an estimated budget. They provide materials as to what they're going to spend those monies on. And this year, the application was geared specifically to accommodate on the tail end the reporting requirements from the state. So you can spend those dollars on marketing, you can spend it on events, and you can spend it on facilities if you're a 501c3 or a 6. So we don't have any of those. So the applicants were instructed to fill out the applications and describe what they are going to spend on their marketing and event efforts. So that goes towards the committee makes the recommendation. Into the contract will state that they need to spend the dollars consistent with RCWs, which is in marketing and events, and be consistent with the application. But when it comes through for reimbursement, when we look at the reimbursements through the city process, we look at those reimbursements and are they consistent with RCWs? Did they spend money on marketing? Did they spend money on operations of an event, of a festival that happened in the city of Port Orchard? Are they seeking reimbursement? We want to make sure that those payments were made and then we're seeking reimbursement. So yes, we look at those aspects, but to review it and say, $6,000 on marketing and $2,000 for events, and specifically for fireworks, we monitor to make sure that they're within. But from my understanding, the reading of the RCW is that it has to be spent on marketing and operations of an event, and as long as those two meet the requirements of those reimbursements, then we issue the reimbursements.
And also the Fathoms has a detailed list of what they're spending their money on.
Could you hand me the mic, please?
What I just said. No, Fathoms has the detailed breakdown.
No, that's what I was going off of, this is their breakdown. But my question was, do they have to use the money for this? If they come up with a new, bigger, better event, can they use the money for that rather than what is here? And I just heard Brandy say, yes, they can.
Correct.
It's conceivable, but we will all be asked to submit revised budgets, when it comes time to get the contracts. Since nobody got what they were asking for, we'll have to submit revised budgets to the city also that correspond to the dollar figures.
Aren't we concerned with the from what I just heard, is that we're going to allocate so much to an organization, and it's up to them to how they're going to spend it?
As long as it's consistent with the RCW, which means it has to be on marketing or operations expense for a festival. Those are the two
So they know
requirements.
what the requirements are when we're giving the funds over to them. And they're going to come back and certify that they did in fact do it in line with the RCW?
Correct, because they provide invoices, copies of receipts saying that they paid for it. And they are required to provide, if they, say, for example, they have an invoice from the Port Orchard Independent marketing an event, and if it's not clearly stated on the invoice that it was for a certain event, then we go back to that the recipient and ask them to provide a copy of that ad that was submitted. And then in this case, this year, Fathoms did the same thing. They submitted a reimbursement, and what we did is some of it was local marketing, and so we went back and said, okay, I need to get where were these regional, or where were the marketing efforts reached? Was it just here in Port Orchard? Was it outside the area? So they went to their newspaper and provided the circulation numbers to justify that, yes, this is regional marketing outside of the local area, or was a percentage of it local, and you have to adjust those. So it has to be those two categories, and they have to provide proof that they've done it in those two categories.
In the 30-plus years I've been on the Finance Committee, the city has only been dinged once from the state auditor, and it happened to be the hotel motel tax. So I just want to make sure we don't inadvertently trip up on something, so.
I review them when they come into my office, and then it also goes to the finance department, and they review it a second time. And so there's that check and balance. So there's things that I've submitted that, for example, she'll go through it differently and say, oh, this wasn't submitted sales tax. So we'll review it and say, yep, you have to have sales tax. We'll kick it back to the requester and say, we can't, this isn't allowable use. You have to find something else. And we did that last year. So
we verify before we hand them the funds.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And Randy is the one verifying it and making sure that we are doing legal compensation. That's not really the committee's concern. We do the high-level allocations.
Correct. And if I do, and I have done this in the past, if I have concerns, or I believe the previous clerk has concerns, we actually reach out to our legal counsel, and we also have reached out to the state auditor to get their official opinion as to whether it is an acceptable reimbursement.
Okay, so now my next question, again, has to do with the Port Orchard Bay Street Association request. And I just want to make sure that this is all appropriate, because when I heard you say it's for the LTAC funds are for marketing and the LTAC funds are for events, I know that historically the Port Orchard Bay Street Association has requested money for the flowers that are put on Bay Street and the hanging baskets that are put on Bay Street. And I just wanted to make sure that those, in fact, are appropriate expenditures from LTAC.
I have received an email from the state auditor a few years ago asking that very question, and it is based on how those plants are purchased. If they are purchased, those plants are purchased to beautify the downtown, just because it's summer and we want to bring people downtown and we want to purchase flowers, it cannot be used for lodging tax. If they are purchasing those events because they're having the first art walk and that is the kickoff of that event and they want to promote the event, then those are an operation expense of an event. So if they're purchasing it for an event, it's an operation expense of that event, it is an allowable reimbursable expense. I don't know if it's for the art walk or whatever event. I just threw out an event that I knew that they did, but I'm not sure which event, but it's my understanding that it was expressed to the POBSA treasurer prior to the application, and So I think we're clear as to how they can purchase those flowers if they want to get reimbursed through lodging tax. Has to be tied through an event.
And I also want to express my appreciation to the people who sit on the committee and Fred for the time and effort they put in to putting all of this together, because it's not an easy task, and we do appreciate their time. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have
Is
what you
there
need, Brandy?
Questions from the council? So is the consensus from the council is to move this forward to the next meeting for some sort of action to process it into the 2016 budget?
Does it require that, or can it just be attached to the budget and adopted with the budget?
It's historically, we brought it to the council, but I think if the consensus here is that we're moving forward with the recommendation, I think it could be incorporated and adopted as part of the budget.
I'm hearing either way. It'll work either way.
I'll connect with Alan, I suppose.
All right. Thank you.
No, I was just saying that I don't have any, it was more of a discussion.
Okay. All right. We're at number 4, 640 Bay Street. And let's see. Mr. Bond, are you up for this, or?
My name's not on the staff report, but I'm happy to tell you what I learned today.
Well, let's start with Mr. Dorsey, because his name is connected to it, and he has some numbers about fencing and other things. So, Mr. Dorsey, you start, and then Mr. Bond has some additional information he got this afternoon. So,
Okay, well, the Public Works Department was asked to provide 2 numbers. One is just to put temporary fencing up, because the fencing that's there is going away very quickly, because that belongs to the receiver of that contract. So it'll be about $120 a month to just put back up temporary fencing. And then the other number that I was asked to provide would be what I'd call an interim modification, which in general is a permanent safety fence coming down Frederick, like a 4-foot high chain link tying into the one that's there because it's a hole, and then leveling with some treated timbers, Hilti bolted into the ground along the back of the walk on Bay Street, and then coming in where the entrances, where the old Chinese restaurant entry was, just creating a level gravel surface. And then we were just talking about a white picket fence. It's not going to keep people out. That's not the intent. I think it's just to restrict to some degree where they come in and out, either through that access road or from the corner, and mainly clean up trip hazards and make it safer. So those are really the 2 options. And the interim was looking at materials, and public works staff is about $5,000 to kind of create an interim area in there. So that's, again, it's a gravel surface that is free from concrete and stuff sticking up. So those were the 2 options you wanted me to look at. And then you found out.
Yeah, I received a call today from the fence company that owns the current fencing there that was leased by the receiver, and they said that the lease expired today. They want to know, I think they're flexible on what day they pick it up within reason, but they said, the lease is expired, do we want to continue, or should they come arrange to pick it up? And so I'm supposed to return their call tomorrow and let them know what direction council has given on the issue.
I think we need their fence until we have our own fence. figure out.
Well, we'd have to enter into a new lease with them, because the current lease is with the receiver.
Yeah.
What's the term of the lease? Do we know?
Their lease, I don't know.
Yeah, and my understanding was they may not pick it up for a few days or a week, so we have a little bit of time, but I don't know what the timing would be for the Public Works crew to do something, or for us to either hire this company or another company to bring temporary fencing.
Yeah, the bid we got was Viking Fence, local.
How soon do they do? I mean, the biggest concern is somebody stepping off the edge on Frederick.
Yeah.
I mean, and I assume that's the bid of, and there are a few thousand of this, I would assume.
Right, and we can check with the receiver, and they can, easiest would be to just transfer the lease. And I think it was what, OSO or OSS? Or
OSS.
OSS. So, I mean, you could see what their price is, but you'd think they'd be fairly competitive.
Do you suppose you could negotiate a month to month? Rent the fence for a month, and then by then we'd have a decision? Could you try that? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not work, so it's a purchase. So we wouldn't have to get multiple bids necessarily, because it's going to be less than.
I just
No,
assume
less than 7,000,
move
yeah.
forward with doing it. I just don't want the one fence gone before the other guy comes in.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, is I think we have the ability with the value to just do this purchase.
You'll spend more time getting bids than you will saving $50. I mean, it's a small contract. They're on the small works roster, aren't they?
Well, it's not work, it's a purchase, so. As far as the interim improvements,
I like the idea of the interim improvement, because I think you're right that something maybe more permanent on Frederick that would open up the sidewalk would be desirable, because currently you can't walk on the sidewalk.
we closed the sidewalk.
Yeah, so I think if we could open up the sidewalk, have some sort of barrier so people don't fall over into the open area. I'm kind of neutral on what we do on Bay Street, if it has to be blocked off, or it can just be open as long as it's safe. My concern is just people falling off on Frederick. And that's just my
That's my
concern.
biggest concern too.
Okay, so,
So the interim, if you did that on Frederick, that'd still be in the 5,000 range,
oh, that's just
the ballpark.
a third of it. I mean, coring, so when the receiver took the building out and they were having to saw cut, we requested that the receiver cut parallel to the sidewalk. And so we've gotten a price for coring. No, they originally were gonna core, and then we decided it's a saddle so they'll fabricate them at the angle, and then they can just bolt them into the concrete rather than trying to core it. So we can, I can move forward on that part, is do the temporary fencing and then do the permanent fencing on Frederick as step one. That's still gonna be a couple $1,000.
I'm confused. You say temporary and then permanent. What?
Well, no, the temporary fencing, we would have to, let's say we get OSS to keep their fencing up
Yeah,
until,
that's a temporary.
that's the temporary, until the permanent Frederick fencing is in place, then that panel, those panels that are on Frederick could go away.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
then we tie into that. But as far as any other improvements,
Wait and see.
just wait and see on that, no desire to.
I mean, do we need timbers down, or is it just a matter of putting some gravel down to level the lot?
You need timbers because of the way the grades are with that driveway and the sidewalk. It kind of starts to go up as you come into it. You've got, I mean, basically we looked at a 4x6 on edge on the back of the sidewalk. That's 6 inches and 5.5 inches. As you carry that south, would create a level area so that then on where that old entry went in between the two buildings, you'd get about halfway until that 4x6 would die into the natural ground, and that 6 inches would be enough to cover.
I think it'd be more aesthetically pleasing to have a gravel lot there than what we're seeing with, bumpy concrete, and I'm not sure about picket fence across the front of it. I'm a bit indifferent about that.
One of the questions that came out of public properties, because
council had put 640 Bay Street at Public Properties to come up with options of what can we do with this moving forward. And one of the questions that came out of public property is how much did we want to invest in it before we did something with it, sell it or whatever. And that was kind of, our primary question. And I appreciate Mark being able to come forward at this meeting with some numbers and some ideas, because those weren't available at the public property meeting. So I'm glad we have them now.
I guess
Appreciate that.
Where I'm looking at the gravel, I see the gravel is probably a safety improvement too, as well as the fencing, because we got trip hazards there.
If we allow people in that area.
Yeah, otherwise I
At
think
the
we need
waste-
the fence. And
Right.
I don't know, I could go either way.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the question is once we put in the timbers and the gravel, are you gonna open it up?
Yeah.
Or are you still gonna keep the temporary fencing? Is it more of an aesthetic thing or a functional? Because there's,
I don't think we need a temporary, I'm not concerned about people walking in there.
Well, there is a driveway cut, and so somebody could drive on there in the absence of any kind of barrier.
Sure, throw a wet blanket on.
There was discussion when we were talking about this property that we were going to make an effort as a city to find someone interested in it. Are we moving forward with that at the same time?
Public property.
That's what public properties is part of our discussion. And the first, we had some short-term goals, and then we have long-term goals. And the short-term goal is, the property's closed now, we own it, so we have to make it safe, and knowing this fencing was going to go away. So the question, and correct me, Jeff and Fred, was how much money are we willing to put into it before we move forward with another action? And are we comfortable? Obviously, we have to do the fencing, we have to do some safety things. And then, is there a time frame that you would like to sell the property?
And we even had debate about selling it because we thought we could sell it to somebody who wouldn't necessarily have to develop it.
Right.
And did we want just another empty lot? So.
Yeah, I would echo what Beck said, but, I also would, and I'm not going to be at the next subcommittee meeting for public properties, so I don't have a lot of skin in this game, but I would, I would recommend that you look at it in a couple different ways. I think the first thing the public properties subcommittee needs is some direction to vet. What is it the full council would like to do with this property? Is it to look at a public-private partnership? Is it to look at listing it? Is it look to hold it ourselves and do something with it? And I think those are the three options that come to the forefront of previous discussions. And so before they can work with staff on vetting any kind of a recommendation, I would think the public property needs to know where to go with that.
I can speak to that. I personally would not advocate to sell it to somebody to hold in their land bank. We've got enough going on. If anybody should hold it in their land bank, it should be us. I want to see it developed, and I want to see a building on that property. And so I would advocate that our criteria for selling it is a development application, someone bringing a proposal to us. I'm not opposed to looking at a public-private partnership. It could be totally private. It just whatever. I think we need to seek proposals, and for me, it's about a project on that property and a building sitting on that property.
And
I would agree, but I think the key word that you said is seek proposals, and I don't think we can just sit back and wait for somebody to come in and express interest. I think we need to
market it.
We have to market that piece of property and see if there's a developer or whomever that would come forth with a project, and then we can evaluate the project.
And then I would like to add on one little comment that's not related directly to 640 Bay Street, but it is directly related to another public property issue, and that is the derelict building ordinance. Now, I'm obviously not going to be around for that as it works through the process, but I would have a concern that one of the potential unintended consequences of putting teeth in an ordinance, if you will, is in the long run, we may wind up owning property we don't really want to own. if we start putting liens as remedies for nuisance and things like that, we force people to make decisions. I could very easily see how we start getting into a discussion with abatement issues, whether it's asbestos and some of these other particular issues that came up with 640 Bay Street, and we know at the end of that process, we own the property. So I would use 640 Bay Street's handling as kind of, is this how we want to go further? Should this happen again if we have a derelict building ordinance that has a lot of teeth? So that's just something that I would be cautious with.
So it sounds like we have a good long-term goal, as you suggested, which is to seek a proposal to put a building there. And I guess one question is, what is our short-term goal? How long, before that happens, what should we do with the property? Or
Make it safe, but I think we should.
Okay, so make it safe, maybe.
Go forward with an effort to try to secure. It's gonna do us no good to have that thing just sitting there on our books.
I mean, I would be open to it being used in a safe fashion temporarily before we get to our long-term goal.
I think our primary goal should be make it safe and market it. The sooner we can get that onto the market, the better off we're gonna be.
So am I hearing, obviously get the temporary fencing in place, either a different company or the same, then get the permanent fencing on Frederick going, and then moving ahead with the timbers and the gravel to level it? And then you can make a decision about the amount of the temporary fencing.
Concern that,
How much do you want to put into it?
I mean, I guess let's monitor it from there. If we just have people start parking their cars, I mean, it sounds like we're gonna need parking signs there if we've got a driveway going onto our gravel.
Well, we can't allow an ad hoc parking lot. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of requirements that come along with a parking lot that we're not going to do, so.
I'm hearing the temporary fencing will go down once it's level.
Once the permanent fence is in there.
Okay, well, then this will all be 2015, work with the treasurer on working on a fringe.
Yeah, we already looked at some funds.
I get
Better bake sale.
I have another thought about the fencing, though, is that when we did when the Jeffcoats took the 5 feet on the one side, are we going to stop the fence there? Are we going to put in a gate, or are we going to go down our side property line, opening up the 5 feet along that building?
I don't think you drive a car through their 5 foot.
No, I would say on the temporary fencing, we need to go down.
Which it isn't there now, so that's
No.
reconfiguring the
No,
temporary.
we need to add, and we included that additional run of fencing.
Okay.
So,
Block day, but not the 5 feet that is now.
Yeah, they would have that 5 feet, but they wouldn't be able to get into
The rest.
the rest.
Public Works have any of those large concrete blocks? Are used for-
Yeah, Jersey Bears, we had some, but yeah, we could.
I mean, wouldn't that be better than a fence? Is just put strategically placed blocks?
And you can sit on it, they're comfortable.
Technology blocks aren't
You
too
can walk
expensive.
between them, you can sit on them, you just can't drive into them.
Are you, you're talking about to keep people from just going in on.
Parking a vehicle.
From driving.
I mean, if they walk in, as long as it's safe, if they walk in, so be it.
Yeah, I mean, we can put ecology blocks down there. It's not gonna be
Could we
very
use
aesthetic.
Neither is a fence.
Temporary chains.
No, that's,
You think a chain link fence is gonna be
the
better?
problem with the bollards and the chain is, that's what happened at the Active Club, is that lady tripped over the chain and broke her arm. It was
Our kids will start swinging on them,
yeah, it was a
just putting blocks in there.
fluorescent orange PVC pipes on each chain loop, and that's what we had to do it with the, at Gibbons, so.
Make it blocks.
Let's
Yeah,
get
I
the
mean,
fencing and the gravel down and worry about the next step.
Okay.
Fencing up and paint a mural.
Okay. All right, we're in really good shape time-wise. We're only whack. Transportation. Mr. Dorsey, Mr. Bond, and council, and/or council members. We're going to put that on each agenda. And it's here, so what's your pleasure?
I can just give an update that our impact fee ordinance and the concurrency ordinance are scheduled for public hearing at the first meeting of November. And so those two items are moving forward as requested by council.
What about the transportation, the framework for the transportation benefit district? We've seen the draft document. Are we ready? I know we're not ready to put any type of, fees or anything to that, but there was discussion that we wanted by the end of the year to pass the framework with that, I thought.
I think the ordinance is written and
Absolutely
ready to go.
Yeah.
Can we,
Would you like to hold, do we have to hold a public hearing, I assume, on that?
You do have to hold a public hearing.
So we can schedule a public hearing on the first meeting of November as well?
okay.
27th is going to be really busy.
Well,
Everybody else?
have we decided that we're not going to talk to the county about joining our districts?
I believe that wasn't anything that we had control over. I mean, we have a document to create the framework of a benefit district.
I mean, is it neutral to that? Because, no, I was just wondering if we were going to have a conversation with the county to see if they wanted to be in a district with us, since their residents use our streets.
So it's feasible at all for myself.
Is it feasible?
Yes, it is.
Is it? I think it's worth a call.
Yeah, I would at least recommend some contact. I know the commissioner was at least open to the discussion.
I think it's worth a call.
I don't know how it would work out, but to me, it's sort of an equity. It's like people outside the city use city streets, and we use county streets. So, is there?
It's either that or toll booths.
So are we then going to include a benefit districts of the entire south of the county?
That would depend on how the talk goes.
I don't think you have to draw it for the entire south end.
I think you would probably, and we had this discussion at a council meeting, and we talked about the UGA. And it seems to me we had given that the benefit district would be our UGA boundaries. And I thought we gave an assignment to someone to contact the county.
Yeah, that's what it is.
We could go back and check our minutes, but I thought that had already been assigned. I don't remember, but I remember the discussion.
I thought it was. Yeah, I thought Fred was going to get a hold of
Jarvis right up with.
That's my right.
So I
Well,
guess,
she's willing to come to a meeting.
So, but our document, do we need to find that boundary though before we bring the document forward?
if you're gonna do something other than.
Yeah, you're gonna have to create the oversight board, and if they're gonna be a part of it, I'm assuming they want something to say about where the money is going.
I also believe that needs to be done expeditiously, because I do believe that our transportation benefit district should be addressed by this council before the end of the year. And I received, at the budget committee meeting we had the other evening, the city treasurer indicated he was going to give us a draft of potential agendas through the end of the year. And I'm sure he had that somewhere on, and you gave it to me, and yes, it was there, and it seems to me it was the end of November for the TBD.
I know that was just Mr. Corito's out of town right now.
That was just, those were just basically placeholders so that we didn't get, so that our work was spread out evenly, through the end of the year.
I would actually prefer that we direct a staff member to contact the county staff and our commissioner. I can call her, but I don't know that that would be productive.
You should have a commissioner.
Well, because she's interested in having her staff talk. She's interested in
But it needs to come from, it's got to be a top-down.
Yeah.
All right. So I can call her.
She has to direct her staff to be receptive of it if you guys agree.
She basically, okay, I'll call her. Do you know when she's back? Okay.
I think Jerry Childs should go up and meet with him.
With who?
Do rock, paper, scissors.
Any other transportation questions?
That was my burning issue. I think we're bringing the other stuff forward. The impact fee is on the agenda for a public hearing.
Right, the impact fee and concurrency, and then Fred's going to check on the TBD, and hopefully, even with his conversation, we need that on our agenda at the end of November.
I do have a question about the impact fee that comes to mind, and that is the effective date, which we haven't filled in on the ordinance yet. The draft that, I think we had talked about the first of the year, and is that still the desire? Okay. And one other point on that, the Planning Commission recommended the comp plan amendment to adopt the TIP, and so that has to be adopted concurrent with the traffic impact fee ordinance, and so that'll also be on that same meeting agenda, just to amend the appendix that has the list of transportation projects.
And that is scheduled when, I'm sorry?
November, what is it, 10th?
For the 10th, it's on the 10th.
10th, I believe.
The other thing that I just have for transportation is, and I realize all these things are working towards that, but we can't let go of Tremont funding.
I've got a plan for Tremont.
Okay.
Big set.
I'm glad.
Somebody does.
Remember my comment earlier, I don't care about them, but I don't want to go to jail.
Is,
I have a
Mark has a
specific-
plan, but speaking publicly at this point wouldn't help the plan.
Right. I have
So,
a specific.
if individual members of the council would like to talk to you about.
Right, it's too soon to.
It's too soon to throw conversations.
I guess when we go into our budget deliberations, I'm hearing resoundingly, as I'm talking to folks, that we need to move forward on Bethel, and I would like to see in our, if there needs to be resources put in the 2016 budget, and I'm not saying, construction ready plans, but start that process for that, what it is Bethel's gonna look like, and I don't know
We've currently got that in the tip. We have that in 17.
in 17. So I'd like to see what the cost to that is, and whether or not we need to make that a priority, move that up a year or not, and whether or not you need to be honest too with us,
And
whether or
well,
not you have the bandwidth to accomplish that task.
And I think we could even go out with an RFP for whoever's going to help us do that work at the end of 2016, with the anticipation that the contract would be effective on the first of the year or something like that, coinciding with a new budget maybe.
Yeah, I guess from a staffing, my crystal ball says that 16 is Bay Street right-of-way acquisitions, 17 and 18 will be Tremont construction, 17 will be the redesign, and then 19 through 21 will be the Bay Street construction. So kind of looking at staffing levels to be able to manage all that, it's really, I kind of got it programmed out. Because when we're doing Tremont, we're not going to be doing much else, even though we'll have a consultant.
But I think we need to have an idea what that road's gonna look like, because all of a sudden, then that box store comes in on the old Home Depot site, and we don't know how much right-of-way we're asking for, and what the road configuration should be.
Yeah,
we have those answers.
Yeah, we had a meeting with somebody who wanted to develop a small box store that we weren't sure what to tell them on right of way just a couple weeks ago, and we said we just encourage you to be proactive and think about this in your design, and we don't know how much we're going to need.
I have a question for council. Like, conceptually, would you think that the first stage would be to make Bethel 3 lanes? We have a refuge lane down the entire stretch from Sedgwick to Tremont. I mean, that to me would be one concept, and then eventually it might be 5 lanes.
Well, I think you're bracketed. We know that the county's $42 million project is a 5-lane with bike lanes and pedestrianized, and that's the one edge of the pendulum swing. And I think the other one is the 30,000 ADT continuous center turn lane with just 2 travel lanes, bike lanes, pedestrianized improvements, and then intersection improvements. I personally think that that's more than adequate, well into the future, like beyond. I mean,
We need turn lanes, sidewalks, and shoulder.
Well, it's like, Bethel north of Tremont Lund is almost, well, what do you mean? I mean, it's okay, you have your refuge lane. It's just that between Tremont and Sedgwick, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, the city did because I worked on the design at Parametrics, the city did the Bethel widening project in 1990. That went from Lincoln to the roundabout, and so you have that, or I guess it's to the post office. But, so that's a fairly new road as far as the city's concerned.
I tend to agree with Fred, other than the Mitchell Y is problematic.
Well, that's changed. You know, the county has a revision to Lincoln and Mitchell, and it actually puts a roundabout at Lundberg and gets rid of Lincoln, and it brings Mitchell and
I guess I want to have those conversations sooner versus later.
Yeah.
We can't wait until 2019 or.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be talking about the budget here in a couple of weeks, so.
I guess I'm just asking to be prepared to answer questions.
I think if we're gonna actually go through a design process that goes over like a year, I have to look at Tremont. It's a similar effort, and that started out as a $400,000 design that ended up at $1 million. But I think for
but that was complete plans.
I think a conceptual. If you want to get to a hard conceptual, because again, we've got to be able to tell people, these are your frontage improvements, this is where the sidewalk's going to be, or are we going to have you build the sidewalk now or do something in the interim because we can't get things to grade. I think on that, you're still looking at a $300,000, it's almost like a 30% design. It's a conceptual with a 30% design level. You're not taking it to ad-ready PS&E, but I think you're at a 30% design.
Yeah, I think I would aim to start looking at consultants to do the work in August so that you have budget numbers to work with going into the first year.
17. Yeah.
So make that a council goal for next year.
I think that comment that I was putting out actually dovetails into Mr. Clausen's next. Because that was a budget item I'm looking for.
Yeah, if you can find an extra $250,000-300,000 for 16, we could get going.
Just that much.
Yeah.
Once again, a bigger bake sale.
Thank you, benefactor somewhere.
Well, we were gonna paint City Hall, right? So we just won't do that.
Well, that's 2015 money. That's REIT money.
Yeah,
Can't use that for Tremont.
I'll agree with you.
Any other transportation? Not seeing none, then we'll do item 6, 16, 2016 budget review.
The Finance Committee met with Mr. Barton and kind of went through the budget that was presented. There were a few things that jumped out at us that we're prepared to come forward with a recommendation. Probably the largest is the issue of Bethel. The initial budget had 296,000 to complete section A and B. That was going to be funded with 183 out of REIT funding and 133 out of property tax. The committee had quite a discussion on that, and we're very comfortable of actually pulling more REIT funding out and pretty much taking Bethel from, shall we say, Mitchell all the way through, I think we could probably almost get to Sedgwick with that.
Get it behind us.
The one thing that I will share with my committee members that has come up subsequent to our discussion, well, before I go there, let me first add that REIT funding can be used for this type of project for one more year. After that, the restrictions come into what REIT can be used for, and maintenance, unfortunately, is not one of them. So this would be 2016 would be the last year that we would be able to do this. So we're certainly recommending going forward with that. The thing that has come up subsequent to our committee meeting, and although at our committee meeting we talked about our implied promise to Mr. Dorsey about a pavement management system and trying to come up with the funding for that. Mr. Martin and I had a discussion about, can we pull a little bit more funding out of REIT so that we don't have to use the local property tax, which was initially in there, that would allow us to use the local property tax to then purchase the pavement management system that Mr. Dorsey, and we could accomplish both the improvements to Bethel Road and the purchase of the pavement management system. So that is, that seemed to be the biggest things that we talked about. There was a few other little things, like, for example, the budget that we were presented with had the purchase of 3 police cars. One of them was coming out of the equipment replacement fund with no funding going back in, which the committee is pretty strong in our feeling that we need to continue to put money into that fund, so as we move into the future, we've got some monies to be able to keep up with that. There were other vehicles in there, a Go4 parking vehicle, a code enforcement vehicle coming out of the general fund, a water sewer truck that would come out of the utility fund, and a street truck which would come out of the street fund. So that was, at a very high level, some of the things that we talked about. But more importantly, what we wanted to do here was to tell the council that get your budget book out. As Rob mentioned earlier, get your Christmas list out. Identify the things that you think needs to be considered, so that when we come back, we'll be able to incorporate everyone's thoughts into the development of the 2016 budget. So I think that's probably the strongest message that we want to convey tonight is.
You need him right now?
No, we don't need him right now.
What's the timeline look like, John, for the next steps?
We'll have, the next work study will have
Yeah.
an hour plus on the budget.
So that's really, you can certainly give it to us earlier, but
Please do.
that's kind of the drop dead date. is the
It's
next-
the supplementals that you want to look at, it's the great pages.
So be sure and get that information
Are
to
you
us.
going to
That would be the
supplemental
17th of November.
interviews?
I'm sorry?
The supplemental interviews.
Yeah, we're scheduled to do that. Do you have the date on that, Alan? For the interviews with the department heads?
That Monday, the 16th of November.
So certainly everyone's welcome.
So, and try and keep in mind too that we don't have a money tree, so if you're gonna add 100,000, what are we not gonna do? It's a balancing act.
And really, the meetings that we have with the department directors is more to hear from them of what they feel is absolutely important and not. And after our discussion with them, we can really sit down and figure out, can we afford all of the things that are on the wish list for everyone? Which there's generally a response of no. So, did I miss anything? Committee members, that was kind of a
Electric
big.
car.
Pardon me?
I want an electric car for the.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about the code enforcement as, it's a perfect opportunity to put that into an electric vehicle.
The other thing
And save on fuel.
we talked about too was going forward, being more consistent in the color of our vehicles.
Yeah.
Potentially, going forward, they'd all be white, so you can distinguish them.
Means you can park there.
Versus we've got kind of a
A
rainbow.
rainbow of
The
vehicles.
colors are coming out there. So
On Alan said that, didn't
it was Alan Martin's idea.
It just seems to me we've grown to the point where, it's a fleet of trucks, and when people come down the street, I think they should recognize that it's their truck and it's part of the city, and I think.
No, I think it's a great idea.
So does that mean all the existing vehicles get painted?
No, actually a clock.
Can I ask just an ancillary question? So if we get an electric car,
Yeah, you have to fix that problem, we have to plug it in somewhere.
we've only got the blinks down on the waterfront.
you? Take your lunch.
I could put one in down here.
How much would
They're
that
not that
cost?
hard to put in anymore.
$3,000.
Okay.
But my concern would be picking up signs and other things in the roadway and what vehicle that goes in and
That
whether.
goes with the trailer that you get with your electric car.
So, I mean, I'm happy to do that, but it means that Public Works is probably gonna be taking on the cleanup of the right of way when it comes to things taped to signs and that sort of thing. Well, and it's gonna be wet and kind of, issues
Fires
then.
gonna have that signs
I
in it?
think it's Public Works
I
might
thought we did
little trailer.
pickup signs in the right.
Yeah.
So it was a recommendation, so
They got them
I
at
guess
Lowe's.
we'll talk more about that together in the meeting.
It would be great if we got, we're growing, I mean, we're getting there, and a great place to be was if we had, the cars were all owned by the fund rather than by, look at as departments, so that, if, matter of fact, there was a truck, it would actually be charged back on an hourly basis. That's how you set these up, so next people could just actually use the truck and street or utility would be paid for it. So there's a way to get this so that we're more efficient with the vehicles. But as John and I have talked, we've come a long ways in the last 6 years to get to even talk about some of these issues. So
Yeah.
there's some things we can do.
Yeah, and you can do that now. I mean, Doug could drive up with his electric car and grab a truck from Ray because somebody's sick. I mean, that's still there.
Yeah, but you don't get to charge them back.
No, we have to capture that.
Yeah, so
It would be interesting to know certainly there's going to be exceptions to every rule, but if 80% of the time is driving from one job site to the next, then an electric vehicle would probably be appropriate. 75% of the time you're out picking up stuff from the side of the road, maybe not. But it certainly would help us in our ongoing operating expenses if we can go away from fuel and get into something that's far less
Maybe it's our
expensive.
building inspector that needs to be in that electric car, and the car he has needs to
Could very well be.
So think about it, that's all we're asking.
Yeah.
Rainbow thinking.
I'll take electric cars.
I drive them. I don't think they're bad.
Build a silent car.
All right, and that's
Pretty much it.
Mr. Mayor, I have a quick good of the order, if I may. So most of you know all this already, so I'm not saying anything that nobody is not aware of. But I did check with the auditor a 3 weeks back and called the auditor's office, and they did inform me because I'm on a short, full-term election. My term will end when the election is certified. The election will be certified on November 24th between 9 and 9:30. So effectively on 11/24 at 9 a.m., my term is done. There will be a council meeting that night, and obviously there will be a new elected council member, so staff may want to figure out swearing in ceremonies and all of that if council wants a full council that night. I have a private conflict on the 27th of October, so I won't be making that many, and I have a business engagement on the 10th of November, so I won't be making that meeting. So it looks like today, November 17th, will be my last meeting.
So the party's over?
One more.
Except
Would you
for-
like us to excuse you?
One more meeting.
No, it's not.
The committee meetings in November, should we expect you, or?
Sure, yeah.
Just keep me posted.
Check the flights on Monday.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you all. And it's been a great learning experience. And I do want to thank the council and the staff and the citizens for giving me this opportunity. It's been wonderful. Logistically, it's just not going to work out with my personal situation to keep going. But I certainly did enjoy it. So thank you all.
Okay, any other good of the order? Seeing none, we're adjourned at 9:02.